I'm writing this now because many years have passed and exists between who I was then and who I am now. At the time, I didn't know how to talk about what happened. I didn't even know how to think about it. When people asked why I moved out, I said, I found a better place, closer to university. That wasn't untrue, but it wasn't the real reason either. This happened in the early 1990s, when I was a university student in my early 20s, studying engineering. I had moved to the city for my final years of school and was looking for a quiet apartment where I could focus. I didn't need anything special, just somewhere affordable, close enough to campus, and calm. The apartment seemed right. It was a one-bedroom unit in a concrete building built in the late 1950s. Solid, utilitarian, and slightly worn in the way older buildings tend to be. The layout was simple: a narrow entrance hallway, a small bathroom on the right, a compact kitchen straight ahead, and a living room that also served as a bedroom. The living room had one large window facing the street below. The building itself felt settled, like it had been standing long enough to absorb the routines of the people who had lived there before me. The landlord mentioned that the previous tenant had lived there for many years and had passed away. He said it casually, like a detail that no longer mattered. I didn't ask questions. People die everywhere. The first few weeks were uneventful. I settled into a predictable routine. Classes during the day, studying late at night. I preferred working after midnight, when the building was quiet and the street below was mostly empty. I learned the building's sounds, the pipes knocking softly, the elevator cables humming, distant doors closing on other floors. That's why I noticed when something felt different. The first time I saw him, I didn't know what I was looking at. It was close to 2 a.m. I was sitting on the couch with the lights off, books stacked beside me. The streetlight outside cast a dull yellow glow through the window, just enough to outline the room. Something about the reflection on the glass felt wrong. There was a darker shape near the window. Not outside, inside the apartment. At first I assumed it was my reflection layered strangely against the darkness. I shifted slightly. My reflection moved. The shape didn't. It stood close to the window, tall and narrow, facing outward toward the street. There were no details, no face, no clothing, just the clear impression of someone standing there, perfectly still. I turned on the lamp immediately. The corner was empty. I told myself I was tired, that it was a trick of the light. I went to bed, unsettled, but not afraid. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same place. This time I noticed something that made it harder to dismiss. The shape didn't reflect light properly. It wasn't a shadow. It didn't behave like anything physical. It felt like an absence, a place where the room felt thinner. I turned on the light. Gone. Over the next weeks, the area near the window began to feel occupied. Not threatening, just claimed. I avoided standing there without consciously deciding to. Sometimes, while studying, I felt the sensation of someone standing behind me. I never saw anything when I turned around. What confused me most was that I didn't feel afraid. I felt observed, but gently, like being noticed by someone who wasn't asking for anything. One night, I found myself standing by the window, without remembering getting up. I was looking down at the street. Cars passed occasionally. People walked by without looking up. There were no glowing screens in their hands, no reason for anyone to linger. As I stood there, I felt a deep sense of waiting. Not impatience, endurance. Like someone standing in one place because leaving no longer made sense. The next morning, I noticed a faint, worn spot on the floor near the window. The laminate there looked slightly dulled, as if someone had stood in that exact place for a very long time. A few days later, I ran into one of the neighbors in the stairwell. She was an older woman, probably in her late 70s, with short gray hair and a habit of stopping people to talk. She seemed to know everyone in the building, who lived where, who had moved out, who hadn't been seen in a while. "You're in 4B now, aren't you?" she said. "Yes," I replied. "I moved in a few months ago." She nodded. "I know. I keep an eye on things here." I hesitated, then asked, "Do you remember the man who lived there before me?" Her smile faded. "Oh," she said quietly. "Yes, I remember him." She leaned against the railing, clearly not in a hurry. "He lived there a long time, very quiet, polite, always said hello." I asked if he had family. "He had a son," she said immediately. "The boy used to visit. Not every day, but often enough." Then the visit stopped. "What happened?" I asked. "The boy was drafted into the army," she said. "This was years ago. He was supposed to come back after his service." She shook her head slowly. "He never did." I asked if the man knew. She looked at me carefully. "I don't think so," she said. "He kept waiting. He stood by that window every night. I saw him when I passed by, always looking down at the street." She lowered her voice. "He died alone. One night. Heart failure, they said. After that conversation, one thought wouldn't leave me. Why was he never told? In those days, news traveled slowly. Letters were delayed. Information passed through offices and hands before it reached the people it belonged to. Official notices didn't disappear. They waited. That's when I began paying attention to the mailboxes. They were on the ground floor near the entrance. A long metal panel with small square doors. Most were scratched, dented, open daily. One wasn't. The one with my apartment number? It looked untouched. Dust clung to the edges. The lock looked stiff, unused. I realized I had never been given a mailbox key. I asked the landlord for it later that day. He hesitated, then handed me a small old key without comment. That evening, I opened the box. Inside was a thick stack of old mail. Advertisements, notices, envelopes faded by time. And between them was one official letter, unopened. I won't write the name on it, out of respect. It doesn't matter. I opened it. It was the death confirmation. Formal language. Dates. Finality. I read it standing there in the hallway, then folded it carefully and took it upstairs. That night, I didn't place the letter by the window. I kept it on the table. And that was when something changed. For the first time since I'd moved in, the shape I saw in reflections wasn't facing the window. It was facing me. I noticed it in the dark glass of the television, then again in the reflective surface of the kitchen cabinets, always oriented toward where I was sitting, watching, not accusing, not angry, just aware. That was when I understood. The waiting was over. I took the letter and placed it on the windowsill, leaning it gently against the glass. "I thought you should know," I said quietly. The room felt still. The heaviness didn't vanish, but it softened, like something long carried had finally been acknowledged. I left the letter there when I moved out. I don't know if it helped. But I like to believe that, for the first time, he wasn't waiting anymore. Even now, years later, when I walk past lit windows at night, I sometimes slow down, I look up and wonder how many people are still standing somewhere, waiting for someone who will never return. And how many of them don't even know they're alone.